Hello again, everyone. And for those of you who have been with us from the start of the day, you may be a little bit tired of me by now. But I hope this session is still very useful for you. This is for international medical graduates, and it's a welcome to UK practice taster. Now, this is albeit designed for IMG's, international medical graduates. There are themes that are relevant to whichever healthcare career you are interested in. And you may be pleased to know as well that the NMC are doing something very similar now. We work with them to produce it, as are the HCPC. So whilst not everything will be entirely relevant, if you're not a doctor, there will be some relevancy. So please do stay, whatever your healthcare career. So I want to start by giving you a huge welcome. Whether you have been here a little while, whether you're thinking of starting, welcome. You make such a huge difference. If you were on the earlier session, I mentioned the huge difference that international graduates make to UK practice. And I mentioned that I've been doing some research for a book on anti-racism in medicine. And one of the things that I learned actually last year from the work on that is that geriatrics, the way that we have it here, would look very, very different if it hadn't been for international medical graduates who created it, essentially, based on their learning and style of practice in their countries of qualification. So it's essentially Indian, as it happens, international medical graduates who created geriatrics as we know it. So welcome. And thank you for the dedication, the insight, the care and compassion that you bring to patients and colleagues in the system every single day. Okay. So by way of very brief introduction, in case any of you have joined, this is a first session with me that you're joining. I've been in healthcare for about 25 years now, and I've worked with survivors of abuse for years. I still do a little bit of that, but my day job now, if you will, is at the GMC, where a number of years ago, I was asked to set up a support centre for doctors on the ground. And I remember at the time thinking it was a really progressive thing for a regulator to do. It's not something that I had seen in my own MDT, in my own multidisciplinary team before. So I jumped at the chance. But I quickly realised whether it was UK graduates or international graduates, we were beheld in quite a lot of fear. And that was crystallised for me when I was once introduced in the early stages of my role onto the conference podium to the theme of the Imperial March. They actually embedded that into the PowerPoint. And I understand why. We are predominantly thought of in fitness to practice terms because it's about livelihoods ultimately. But as I learned much more about what the GMC do, because at the time I didn't know that much, of all our statutory functions, the ones that we have to deliver by law, I quickly realised that there in the centre, standards, that is the absolute fulcrum of what we do. And I would argue much more important for patient safety, actually, than fitness to practice. Why? Because the really serious fitness to practice stuff that we see applies to a tiny minority, fewer than 0.025% of the register. And that means that morally, most importantly, but also logically, the more that we can do to support colleagues on the ground to deliver challenging standards in challenging times, and, that's been the case for a long time, challenging times, well, that's where we need to be. And that's what the team that I helped set up are now known as GMC Outreach, and that's what I head up the operations for. That's what I co-lead, and this is what we do. I won't labour this too much because some of you certainly, I'm sure, will have been here earlier on in the day. But the bit that is particularly relevant to you as internationally qualified graduates is that last bullet. So yes, my team are there on the ground delivering supportive interventions, one of which is around international graduates. But the history, if you will, our origin story of doing work for international graduates comes partly from my team, because when we were out on the ground listening, delivering interventions and engaging with different groups, one of those areas we were consistently hearing about was the experience of international medical graduates. And in order to deliver true upstream regulation, i.e. preventing harm, rather than just, sanctioning people at the end, the downstream end of the process, we needed to do a lot more, and we felt the system needed to do a lot more to provide support. So that's upstream regulation, and I think it's particularly relevant to what we do to support international colleagues. So with that, I'm going to share a list with you. And as you look at this list, I want you to have a think about what you think it represents, okay? And feel free to type in the chat. What do you think this list is? It's a real list. I'll have a quick look at the chat. But don't worry if it doesn't strike you straight away. Now, a lot of people, when they look at that list, when I play it in a room, for example, at a conference, a lot of people will start laughing and saying it's StatMand, so statutory, mandatory training, e-learning, etc. In this case, this list was, well, I mentioned her before, my friend who qualified in Sudan and started working here not that long ago, 2016. This was the gamut of her induction. This is all she had. And then it was like, you're safe to be on the wards now. No welcome. No, welcome to the NHS. Thank you for bringing your skills here. This is how it all works. It's quite complicated, isn't it? Let someone explain it to you. This is what the different patient expectations are. These are the different medico-legal, ethical things that you might need to know about. This is how the rather interesting IT systems work, by the way. Where was the support? There wasn't any. And I talk about support for IMGs, but I want to be really, really clear on one point. I cannot emphasize enough that the deficit is not in IMGs. There is a strong evidence base to demonstrate that the deficit is in our system. There are data and lived experience that prove that point. We are not meeting the Maslowy stuff, as I like to call it, colleagues' basic needs. If someone is coming here and doesn't have accommodation, doesn't know how to set up a bank account, doesn't know how the payslip works, those basic needs, how can you flourish? How can you thrive without that? If you are recruiting international colleagues, then it is incumbent on you to provide that support, from signposting to, well, actually a lot more, because some organisations that are doing a really good job are doing all kinds of things like having language cafes and driving lessons, because it can be so different here, etc. So they need to explain not only support with that culture shock, but also explain the differences in the system. And if they don't do that, the deficit is in them, not our IMGs. And we were hearing all kinds of terrible stories, a bit like my friend, but even more extreme than that. No welcome, no hello, no introduction, thrown onto the ward straight away. no explanation of how equipment might be a bit different. So, for example, one IMG I met during one of our focus groups wasn't told that, well, in where he practices one unisex catheter, here, of course, we have male and female, and he wasn't told. Put on a male ward, the cupboard had both male and female catheters. Now, how eminently preventable was the potential catastrophe there? So back in 2011, we called for the system to create an induction for IMGs, but unfortunately there was no ownership at the time. Everyone agreed it was a good idea, but didn't have the resource or felt that it sat with them per se. And whilst it's not in our regulatory remit in that we can't mandate that type of induction, we did decide we needed to do something, so we created our own. And that is Welcome to UK Practice, which today is a taster session of. Now, it's a half-day workshop. We also have a full-day one that is back in development. It used to be full day, but a lot changed, as you might imagine, over the pandemic. And this workshop, well, I'll tell you more about it as we go through, clearly, but I cannot recommend enough that you sign up and join it. It's free. Delivered online, but also in person. Fewer in-person events, but that's because we find that it's more accessible for people online, although I have to say I really love the in-person ones. But yes, if you have a look on our website, then you can sign up. You don't you don't need to be registered, for example. But my question for you, I'm using Mentimeter again for those who were at the last workshop. You may, if you're at the very first one, know the answer to this. But if I can ask you to grab your phones and type in menti.com, it will give you a page to allow you to enter the code that you see there at the top of the slide. So if you would do that, I'll just give you a few moments to get on. I'll see if anyone was there and remembers the answer. Okay. Okay, we've got one person connected. I'm not going to say anything. Of course, I don't know which of you were at previous sessions. I should have thought this through, but I was thinking that this session might just be for IMG colleagues who weren't at the previous session. But I'll put you out of your misery. 5 of you have either guessed right or were at the previous sessions and remember. Yeah, there has been exponential growth of IMGs joining the register. And that means that support is even more important. It was important back in 2011 when we called for it, but now it's even more important. And what Welcome to UK Practice does, it takes you through good medical practice, which we ran a workshop on earlier. And my next question for you, good medical practice, the standards that we have, how many pieces of professional standards do you think we actually publish? Is it just good medical practice, or is it more than that? What do you think? And these are all the ethical pieces of guidance, so not things like revalidation, because that's just, this is a process, etc. Here's some advice and support. These are the medical ethical pieces. It's always interesting to see how this moves. There we go. I was waiting for at least 2 people to have it. Yes, so 2 people have it. There are 31 pieces of medical ethical guidance. Yeah. Some of you may have heard about how sometimes people feel that it's common sense and obvious. And what we're going to do in this session is explore the much more complex themes, which I alluded to earlier. And in the real half-day workshop of Welcome to UK Practice, we delve into these in much, much more detail, as you can imagine. It's a highly interactive workshop based on video ethical scenarios where you really explore the detail around shared decision-making and consent, around raising concerns, around confidentiality, around Gillick competency, all sorts. So that's what the full session does, but I'm going to give you a flavour. And as I say, you'll see that the standards that we really go through with you there is, well, a very much more than common sense. And this next slide, which is a bit horrible, and I don't expect you to read, that's the point of the slide. This is a list of every single piece of legislation that we distilled to put into just one of those guidance documents, and that's the confidentiality guidance. So that just shows you that if you didn't have that guidance, you'd need to know technically about all of this legislation. Whereas what we do with all our guidance documents, we look at the relevant UK legislation, we look at the wider ethical framework, and we take out the salient bits of the legislation and put it into a more digestible document for you, which can act as a reference guide as well as really helping you through the more complex scenarios that you may see. So we'll start with one that's not quite as complex, but gives you a flavour. So in this case study, I want you to meet Sally, and I'll let you read that. And just whilst you read that, have a quick look at the chat. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to read that now. And my question for you is, in this scenario, let's say that you are her GP, okay? So you've got a good rapport with her, you know her quite well, and she wants to, understandably, speak with you about her diagnosis. In this scenario, though, she's asked for that video consult. Is that appropriate? I was just about to say everyone's going with it depends, but someone's gone with yes. Yeah. Now, of course, in real life, you would know much more about Sally. You'd have a lot more detail than 3 boxes of high-level information. But yeah, so you may have made the assumption as you're answering yes or no, you may have made assumptions. So those answering yes, you may have made the assumption that actually, she said that I've got a good rapport with Sally. An initial consultation by video might be fine. You may have made the assumption that the Sally that I've made up in my mind, I really need to see her in person with what could be a really difficult conversation. Or if you've answered depends, you might be thinking, well, it depends on those things, doesn't it? So what do we say in the standards? They're high level. However, there are detailed elements that can help you with the decision. But the principle, the core principle is high level. Of course, you must provide safe and effective clinical care. That can be done remotely, but it can be done face to face. So it depends on your professional judgment. And earlier in one of the sessions, I said that good medical practice is designed to allow you to exercise your professional judgment, because a booklet of ethical standards can't describe every scenario, but it can provide high-level principles. Now, in addition to those high-level principles, we do provide that support with decision making. So when it comes to making a decision on whether a remote consult is appropriate, then we've got things like this flow chart. And don't worry about trying to read it. I don't know how small the screen is at your end, but it's a screenshot just to show you that it exists, and it's interactive, and you can find it on our website. This is just one example. We have these for other complex areas as well, such as safeguarding. And what you can do using these tools is you can look at the duties, you can put in the relevant bits that it depends, those bits into the equation, if you will, to go, okay, this is what the standards say, and in this particular circumstance, I do think, or I don't think, a remote consultation would be okay. So my point really with this scenario is to introduce you to the fact that there are loads of resources that we have in addition to the sort of digital booklets with the standards. There are also there's also an ethical hub that has all sorts of things, from case studies to decision-making tools, to offer that additional advice, if you will. So do avail yourselves of that. Again, you don't need an account or anything to access all of that. Now, the next scenario that I want to take you through is a little bit more complex. So meet Talia. Talia is a composite of many of the clients that I used to see. And I'll pause and let you read her scenario. So again, obviously there's a bit of a paucity of detail here, and you would have a lot more with Talia actually in front of you. But there are some important points to remember, I think, other than the very obvious, and that is that she has chosen to represent. She's chosen to re-engage with sexual health services. Okay. And yes, there are all of these issues going on. It showed she is subject to domestic abuse, and in conversation, she does confirm that yes, she is still subject to domestic abuse. This is not historical. Okay. You try and explore with her about sharing that with adult safeguarding or with the police. And as you were building a bit of a rapport with her, you can see that she visibly withdraws then. She closes up. She's quite clear, no. She's adamant, no, I don't want you to do that. So to continue the rapport building, you don't want to press. You don't feel you can press at that point, because clearly you want to support her with treatment. You do try and explore the GP question as well. And again, she's adamant that she doesn't want her GP to know. And again, she doesn't want to engage in that bit of the conversation. You try broaching disclosure to her partner, and that is where she looks frightened. So that's the situation in front of you. And my question to you, and the language of this question is important. Do you have to breach Talia's confidentiality? What do you think? And it's in scenarios like this where I defy anyone to tell me that good medical practice, our standards and guidance are common sense. this kind of situation is never common sense. It's never easy. And as you can see, we're 50-50 split. Someone's you've now broken my 50-50, but as you can see, there is quite a diversity of opinion. Okay, but the majority of you are saying no. And the majority of you are right, you don't have to. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you're not going to explore things with her. But I'm going to take you through the decision-making process. So what the guidance would do, reading the guidance, reading the standards, you would see that when it comes to sharing information, when it comes to considering considering sharing confidential information, there are 3 elements that you need to consider. And a lawyer rather interestingly came up with the mnemonic clap to help teach, a lawyer teachers came up with that mnemonic, which I think is particularly entertaining when you're talking about sexual health, but that's an aside. And that mnemonic is, well, the obvious one. Have you got consent? So in this, applying it to Talia, have we got Talia's consent? No, we haven't. So we can't share information based on consent. Does the law require you to share information? And this is really interesting because people will talk about the laws around reckless transmission, the Care Act, etc. And actually, the law, as applied to a scenario like this, a case like this, it does not require you to breach information. So where does that leave you? Because as a doctor, as a healthcare professional, have you got a responsibility as well for the wider public, that wider public interest? And that brings us to the public interest test. So with the public interest test, and by the way, I use my phone to run on the slides. I'm not just randomly looking at my phone. With the public interest test, there are various elements to consider. And the first 2, the more obvious ones, are these 2. So I'll let you just scan that. So we're weighing these 2 things up and applying it to Talia to make it tangible. You are considering benefits to an individual or society in breaching Talia's confidentiality. So that would be the benefits to her partner. Clearly, he may well have contracted HIV and there is a benefit to him getting treatment. And indeed, he might be sleeping around, she might be sleeping around, it might have had other issues, which mean that there is wider societal benefit in breaching Talia's confidentiality. You're weighing that, of course, against the harm to Talia. This time, he might kill her. However, there is something else that needs to be considered on this side of the scales, where you can see I've left a bit of a gap there. And I wonder if anyone knows what the other element that you must weigh needs to be on that side. And I'll give you a few moments to have a think about that. It's not an easy one. And I've run this case with very senior experts in the room in the role that I used to have more as my former day job. We would talk about scenarios like this for hours. Yeah. So I'm reading the comments now. Yeah. Do patients here feel pressurized to share? How do we create safe space? Oh, really good points. The thing that is missing is you also need to weigh that wider public interest in having a confidential medical service. And that, I'm not saying that that makes it easy, by the way, and I'll come to how we apply this, as I say, specifically to Talia. But it does tell you all the considerations that you must have in mind. Okay, so you must have in mind the benefits to wider society, like Talia's partner, the harm to Talia, but also that public interest in that confidential medical service. And what I mean by that is, let's say your service, whether it's a GP practice, whether it's a sexual health clinic, and it's happened a lot with sexual health clinics historically, let's say that service gets a reputation for being leaky with confidential information. And what might happen? Patients might stop presenting. And as I say, that has happened before. So that is something to weigh into the consideration, because, well, I'll tell you, in fact, about a patient, a case that we had where our client, she was raped at knife point, and she came to us for forensics, a health check, and she didn't want that information to be shared. Okay. The place where it happened, the location geographically, is somewhere where people visit quite a bit. There are significant risks to the public there. The person who came to us was someone with quite a high profile. And she said that, look, I need, in order to cope, I need to forget about this, and I need to work with my therapist, counsellors, etc. to do that. I cannot have this go public. I cannot have this shared with the police. I cannot have them asking me questions. I need to try and move forward. So please do not breach my confidentiality. If you do, I will go to the press and tell them how unsupportive you are as a service. So you can now see, I hope, how that makes this very, very real. These black and white words that can be a bit abstract, how it makes it very real. So whenever you have this kind of, and I am talking about really, really complex cases, and of course you will have really complex scenarios, but whenever you have something like this, what do? You look at the standards, you apply those black and white principles, but as I say, it doesn't make it easy. You know, at least it tells you the shoulds and musts that you need to consider, but we all have our own biases. I know where my biases are, for example, in the Talia case. And there isn't room for our biases. So that's why, as I mentioned, we used to have really long conversations about these complex issues to sense check our thinking. There are also medical defence helplines, etc., to, again, help sense check our thinking if you've not got the information to hand, immediately. So that's what I would suggest you do. You know from our standards, and don't bother necessarily trying to read this page, but it just shows you, well, hopefully it will when it moves on along in the slides. It shows you what you should and must consider. All right, I'm just going to give the slide a nudge because it seems to have stopped responding. There we go. Right. Yeah, as I say, don't bother trying to read this now, but it just shows you the kind of information that we've got in the guidance. So you are clear on what you should and must consider, but then always sense check with colleagues when it is that complex decision. When it's not an emergency, you've got time to explore that. And bringing it back to Talia. So what I would do in Talia's scenario, as I said, one important feature was that she has represented. She wants treatment, having re-engaged. You are building a rapport with her. So we've got some time here, and there are all kinds of things as well at play. So For example, you don't know whether she contracted HIV off her partner, off her abusive partner, or maybe he has off her. Now, different factors will influence your decision in different ways. If she had children in the house, either subject to or witnessing the domestic abuse, that will change the weight on the scales. If she's got a zero viral load, which she won't have because she was lost to follow-up, but if she did, then that would change the weight on the scales. If you think with her in front of you, she really does want to stay engaged with services. I've built a good relationship with her. I think I've got a couple of months where I can work with her to persuade her to access adult safeguarding services and thereafter do a notification to a partner. So that's the approach I would take for Talia. The approach that we took for the survivor of rape that I mentioned was that we told the police what happened but didn't give any personal details. They weren't very happy with us, but they actually did up their presence in that geographical location, that very particular location where many women would have been at risk. So anyway, use the standards to sense check, to weigh your decision making, but also when it is something terribly complex, sense check with colleagues as well. You can make calls to adult safeguarding who have lots of expertise in this area. You can make calls to medical defence if it's, let's say, midnight and it is a more urgent decision. And there are learning materials available as well to help you get more practiced in these things. So we've done that. So coming back to the standards then, as we start to wrap up ahead of questions. So the standards, good medical practice, our decision-making and consent, our confidentiality, our end-of-life care, all of these standards, what they are, as I said earlier, way more than common sense. They are that benchmark for that good practice. And they're that safety net as well. And I don't mean that in a defensive practice way. I mean that in the sense that it's a safety net for Talia and you for really, really complex situations. So use it that way. It's supposed to be there to support you. And whatever your profession, you will have ethical standards. For example, the NMC have the code. But as I mentioned, the GMC, we've got 31 pieces. So we do go into a lot of detail. And I know, for example, when I used to work in end-of-life care more, a lot of nurse colleagues, palliative care nurses, used to use our end-of-life care guidance very, very heavily. So all these standards, whatever your profession, they are medical ethical standards, but they are relevant. So feel free to use them. Of course, you need to follow the standards that your own professional regulator produces, but these are all in line with the wider ethical framework and UK law. So to summarise, the standards, therefore, offer that benchmark of expected practice way beyond common sense, but they offer that safety net. And for those of you who were in the anti-discrimination sessions earlier, they offer that lever for change as well. They can offer that lever for change in very practical ways. So going back to end-of-life care, I will always remember one organisation that instituted because of the culture, they instituted a way of working that meant that people weren't really following what they should be around DNA CPR. And they used our end-of-life care guidance to take it to the, as it happens, the Director of Medical Education and say, hang on a minute, the ways of working that we seem to have adopted don't allow us to follow the standards. And that allowed them to change the ways of working to ones that were much more compassionate, actually, and supportive of patients, those close to them, and the team. So, to wrap up, please do join us at Welcome to UK Practice. We know that the course works. It will take you through many more scenarios that we know are particular challenges for IMG colleagues. And as you can see from the feedback here, people do love it. The last couple of bullets are academically robust evaluation, which show unusually for a one-off medical education intervention, practice has changed at time to follow-up. We've got loads more support for IMGs as well. So yes, we've got Welcome to UK Practice, but we have one tailored to primary care. We have a follow-up called Thriving. One challenge is that we find employers often don't know who their IMGs are, so they don't get released for attendance at induction, trust induction sometimes, but it's certainly not Welcome to UK Practice. So we've got a dashboard and we speak with employers and say, look, are you releasing your IMGs? Here's your list of IMGs. You need to release them so that they get a supportive induction. I mentioned in a previous session earlier on today about cultural competence for supervisors or cross-cultural communication. We've got a course around that because supervisors, those our IMGs work with, they themselves need literacy in how to support IMGs. So we do that as well. And of course, any other outreach workshops that we deliver. So that's all great. That's what the GMC do. I've also signposted you to the fact that we have loads on the website. However, our stance, and this goes back to what I was saying in an earlier session today around employer responsibility. And it was something that I actually said on Twitter last night. If you can't afford to provide proper, welcome, comprehensive support for an IMG, then you can't afford to employ an IMG. And we want every employer to implement these standards for them. We can't mandate it. We drew these up in conjunction with the indefatigable, marvellous Prof. Marla Rao, NHS England, the BMA, Medical Protection Society. So we all want this rolled out. But at the GMC, personally, we don't have the power to do so, but we hope every organisation does implement this. So that is it from me. I think we have a little bit of time if there are any questions. So I will pause there and see and have a scan of the comments. And thank you, team. I see the team have shown you where you can book your place, etc. as well. Okay. Yeah, and our exhibition stand does indeed have resources, so you can look at the exhibition as well. Thank you so much. I hope that was useful, and I will leave you with another emphatic urge to go and book onto Welcome to UK, and we hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Bye.